So reading from Mark chapter 1 and verse 16. We've been spending a few weeks now on this passage. And so we're on week 3 of our sermon series. And reading from Mark chapter 1 and verse 16. As Jesus walked beside the Sea of Galilee, he saw Simon and his brother Andrew casting a net into the lake, for they were fishermen. "Come, follow me," Jesus said, "and I will make you fishers of men and women." At once they left their nets and followed him. When he had gone a little farther, he saw James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John in a boat preparing their nets. Without delay he called them, and they left their father Zebedee in a boat with the hired men and followed him. So far we read this morning. And so friends, as we begin this morning, just to remind you briefly of the journey that we've been on. We've been looking particularly at verse 17 over the last 2 weeks, how Jesus calls us to come. There's something that Jesus calls us to come away from, perhaps something in our past, perhaps from our past. And then even as Jesus calls us to come away from something, he calls us to go towards something else. He invites us to follow him, maybe even commands us to follow him. As I begin today, I want to say that following Jesus does not necessarily mean obeying Jesus. I don't think that Jesus gives us a set of rules and says, now obey these in order to be a good Christian. If you obey these, God will be happy with you. And again, to say that I believe God is already happy with each one of us, wherever we are. God rejoices and celebrates in the life that we have made for ourselves. He's happy with us and he loves us more than we can conceive or imagine. And so Jesus invites us to follow him, and then he says, I will make you. I will make you. And to me that is such a wonderful statement, and it's so wonderful because it's a restful statement. It's a peaceful statement, because sometimes we are so busy making ourselves. We are so busy, for me, making the church. And it feels like I'm spent the first month of this year putting all the programs in place and trying to get everything done. And I think my office staff is going crazy because they've just got too much work to do. Because they're saying, we've got to do this, we've got to do that, we've got to get that sorted for the new year. And so often we do that in our lives as well. We try to make ourselves in many different ways. And oftentimes we see it with a sense of pride, don't we? And we speak about, I'm a self-made man. This is what I have achieved. Maybe we look at our background and say, I lifted myself up from those circumstances. And so it's almost an expectation of society that we have to do it ourselves. We have to make ourselves. Jesus says, I will make you. Maybe Jesus is saying to me this morning, I will make your church. You don't have to make yourself. You don't have to be striving continually to be good. You don't have to be perfect or to be someone you're not, to try and please me, to try and be acceptable in my sight. But sometimes I think we don't really believe that. And there's this great verse that we love to use from as Protestants, Ephesians chapter 2 verse 8, for it is by grace that you are saved through faith, and not from yourself. It is the gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast. It is by grace that you have been saved. But we don't really believe it. We still believe that we are saved by works. We still believe that we have to do it ourselves. We have to win the approval of God and others. And we get into this space where we think we've got something when we get there. whatever that may mean. We somehow think that we've earned our spot. And oftentimes we will hear people saying, you know, so-and-so is such a good Christian. He's such a good Christian. She's such a good Christian. And oftentimes that statement is followed with these words: look at all she does. Look at all he does for God. Because he or she is doing something for God, that makes him or her to be a good Christian. You remember the story of Mary and Martha? When Mary was sitting at Jesus' feet, and Martha was doing all the things. She was trying to earn Jesus' love and acceptance. She was in the kitchen, busying herself with all the preparations. She was the one doing, trying to make herself. And Jesus says, she's the one who got it wrong. But what wonderful good news that we don't have to do it ourselves. Because we would never get it right. We can rest and we can trust in Jesus. But I think there is a catch. You see, before Jesus says, I will make you, he says, follow me. For Jesus to make us and shape us into the people we would like to be, we have to follow Jesus. And Jesus doesn't always lead us into places we want to go. About 10 years ago, I was getting to the end of my invitation at Brackenhurst, and for various reasons I decided that I wouldn't accept a second invitation to stay there for a further 5 years. And a number of churches had inquired, and I'd been to interviews, and it just hadn't worked out at any of those churches. All those doors had shut. And so I was sitting in a place where I had no church to go to I guess it was probably in about a year's time, maybe 6 months' time, I think. And I didn't know what was going to happen. And because of the way the system works in the Methodist Church, I knew I would go somewhere. The bishop would find a station for me, I just didn't know. And so the bishop phoned me one day and he said, Neil, I've got a station for you. You can go to Standerton or Piet Retief. And I wasn't very impressed with either of those options. And so I said to the bishop, so thank you very much. Would you mind if I just spent a bit of time to think about it before I get back? And he said, that's fine, but I need to know soon because this needs to be finalized. I said, thank you very much. I put the phone down, and my office was the church's Balkner Hill, so there were a few steps down to the reception office. I went down to the reception office. I said to my secretary, Aneska, today's the day I resign from the Methodist Church. I will go to wherever I choose to go, but I'll go there for the period they send me, and I'll make it clear during that time that I'm resigning, and I'll give them space to find a new minister, but I'm done. And long story short, I eventually decided to go to Standerton, where I didn't want to go, and it was some of the happiest years of my ministry. In that time, God shaped me, God formed me. In many ways, God restored my call to me during the 6 years that I spent there. God made me in that place where I didn't want to go. And I think that's very often true for our lives as well. Very often we are made, we are shaped, we are formed in the places we don't want to go. I don't know who enjoyed school here. I see all the nerds. But sometimes, we didn't all enjoy school. But school shaped us and made us into the people we are. We don't like going always to the doctor or to the dentist. But that's where we discover healing. That's where we are shaped and formed. And friends, sometimes we've been looking over the past 3 weeks, I still haven't found what I'm looking for. That sometimes we don't find what we're looking for because we don't follow Jesus where he wants to take us. And so he can't shape us into the people he'd like us to be. And again, it's not about being obedient, it's not about being super spiritual, it's not about knowing our Bibles backwards. But it's about following where Jesus leads. Where does Jesus lead us? Let me give you 3 examples very briefly this morning. First of all, I think Jesus always leads us into a place of generosity. Into a place where our hearts are open towards others. In Luke chapter 6, verse 8, we read, "Give, and it will be given to you. A good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over, will be poured into your lap. For with the measure you use, it will be measured to you." And I think when I read it, remember that Mug and Bean advertisement of the 2 little boys? And they were baking in the kitchen, there was fly everywhere. It was more, more, more. And I think that's how Jesus calls us to be. Jesus says, if you follow me, I will teach you about how to be generous, about how to give it away. Sometimes we don't always think like that because we're afraid. We come to God, we come to others out of a place of scarcity rather than a place of abundance. And so we think we've got to hang on to the little that we have. We've got to look after the little that we have for myself. I need it more. It feels like there's never enough. And so we stop trusting in God to provide. We hold tightly onto what we have. And because we don't trust God to provide, and because we don't trust God to provide, we are uncomfortable sharing the little that we have with others. And because we are uncomfortable sharing what we think we don't have enough of, we don't follow Jesus where He calls us. And when we don't follow Jesus where He calls us, we fail to experience His blessings of abundance in our lives. We fail to experience God pouring out everything that we need. We don't learn to trust that God will supply needs. And so when things get difficult, we panic. I've managed to stay away from the shops these last few weeks. Just last week, but Lynn's been a couple of times. And she said when she goes into the shops, there's a sense of panic. She was in Macro yesterday, and as fast as the water was being offloaded, it was being taken out. She was in Plastics for Africa on Friday afternoon, and everybody was just grabbing buckets and 25-litre containers. And she said there was an air of panic. There was such a sense of panic that she started panicking. And that's what happens when we're not trusting Jesus. We panic in our lives. We panic when things go wrong. When we follow Jesus into a place of generosity, we discover that we can be generous and God still supplies our needs. We are led to a place of peace and trust in God. Now, secondly, Jesus leads us to a place of humility. I love that verse from Philippians chapter 2, verses 5 to 7. It was in our prayer earlier, where Paul writes to the Philippians, it says, "Your attitude should be the same as that of Christ Jesus, who being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be grasped, but made himself nothing, taking the very nature of a servant." That's what it means to follow Jesus. To humble ourselves, to be people who are willing to come to others out of a place of humility. But very often it's the opposite of our culture, isn't it? We're not taught to be humble. We're taught in our culture today to have our 5 seconds of fame. We all want to be winners on reality shows. We all want people to read our blogs and to watch our YouTube posts and to like our pictures and things on Facebook. Popular culture today is all about how you can become famous, how you can become an idol, how you can be a survivor or a winner. Jesus says, that's not what my kingdom is about. You're not going to get those things if you follow me. And often, that's why we don't follow Jesus. And friends, I think that we all know that fame just brings us emptiness at the end of the day. We've seen so many stories of people who are famous, and at the end of the day, their lives are empty. And sometimes even our prayers lead us to a place of arrogance rather than humility. And we so often come to God with a sense of demanding that God do this, or God do that, or God do the next thing. Jesus didn't demand. He humbled himself, taking on the nature of a servant. And so Jesus leads us to a place of humility. Then Jesus leads us to our enemies. I think this is the one we struggle with the most, and yet it's also where we find our deepest blessing. This is where we find peace. It's the heart of our celebration of communion, when we share the peace with each other. Even the heart of our covenant service, when we say, Lord, put me with who you will. I read a story the other day, and the question that was asked was, what is the strangest party you've been to? And somebody responded, and she said, she spoke about the girl who threw a party for all the people she didn't like. All the people she had problems with, and she was honest about it. She said, I'm having this party because I don't like you. I'm inviting you because I don't get along with you. And the house was decorated with grey and black balloons, and the service was all gloomy and dark and black. And she said, surprisingly, everybody came. She said, maybe it was because she was honest. And the people seemed to be having a good time, and maybe it was because they had an enemy in common. But she says, by the end of the party, all those people she struggled with, she was in good terms with. Some of them went on to become friends, and one of them even became a best friend. Still friends 20, 30 years later. Well, this party with her enemies changed her relationships at work, at school. Jesus says, if you follow me, I will take you to your enemy. The story of Jonah, who was sent to bring God's blessings to the people of Assyria, the enemies, the people who destroyed the nation years earlier. The sentiment at the start, at the heart of the story of the Good Samaritan. Who is the neighbor I must love? The person you despise. It's at the heart of the Beatitudes in Matthew chapter 4, verse 43. You have heard it said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. And Jesus doesn't just say those words. Jesus lives it as he goes to the cross, as he goes to the heart of his enemies and allows them to destroy him. And as they destroy him, you know what he does? He forgives them. And in that, he experiences resurrection life. And perhaps many of us don't experience the resurrection life that Jesus offers because we are not willing to go to our enemies. It's easier to hold a grudge and become bitter over something that somebody did to us than it is to offer forgiveness. But friends, it's when we follow Jesus that Jesus can move us. You see, at the heart of the message of Jesus is the truth that our own egos must be destroyed and Jesus must live in us. The false self must die so that the true self can live. And it can only die when we stop grabbing and keeping everything that we have for ourselves. I have money, I must be someone. It can only die when we learn that we don't have an image that we have to maintain through fame and status. Everybody knows who I am. I must be someone. It can only die in the humility of learning to love your enemy and knowing that God may bless him or her as much or even more as you. Attitude of I am right, you are wrong. Friends, it's only when we're willing to lose everything that we think makes us what we are, that we can discover who we really are, that the ego has been destroyed. And maybe that's why it's easier and more comfortable to worship Jesus on a Sunday morning, to come here and sing wonderful songs and go home again, than to follow him. John Wesley recognized this 250 years ago. It's not easy to follow Jesus. And so he invited his people each year to renew their covenant with God on a regular basis. Some churches you go to, when you become a new member, you stand up and you make a covenant promise with the congregation that you're going to participate and be a good member. We don't do that in the Methodist Church. In the Methodist Church, every year, everybody makes a covenant. They say, this is who we are, this is what we will do. Whereas you recognize the difficulties that we have with Jesus and each other. And so we are invited to follow Jesus when it is easy and when it is difficult, when it brings honor or reproach, when it suits us and when it does not, when it pleases us or causes us to deny ourselves, when we are called into service with those we like and with those we do not like, when we are used by God and when we are not. We're reminded to yield ourselves completely to God in generosity with humility and even to our enemies. And when we do that, we discover that it is only the true self left standing. It is only the Christ in me that lives. The true self that doesn't have to rely on wealth or power, prestige or status. We discover that there's nothing left alive in us except Jesus. And we discover that Jesus has made us. We find that the life that is beyond life, the kingdom of God, we find what we're looking for. And when we get there, we discover that we didn't do it by ourselves at all. But from the beginning, God has been doing a good work in our lives. And friends, when we get there, then we're ready to go fishing. And that's what we're going to speak about next week. Next time. Next week I won't be here, I'll be here in 2 weeks. Amen.